Hey everyone, I'm Anso. This is my workshop, and today we're talking about knife shows. I love knife shows. It's one of the things I've enjoyed the most about being a custom knife maker. I simply love preparing for a show. I love thinking about what do I want to bring. I love making the knives for a show, and I absolutely love being at a show, meeting all my customers, meeting new and old friends, just being present in the knife community, bringing the best of what I can bring at all and seeing your response to my work firsthand. Something that I'm not experiencing that often because, one, the distance. I'm in Denmark. Most of my customers are in the US, so obviously there's some distance that creates problems, if you will, with meeting the customers, but also just the fact that like 355 days of the year I'm a hermit living here in my shop, just working day out and day in, and being at a show allows me to just be out there, and I simply love it. Knife shows in general has been something that has been enormously important for all knife makers out there. Before internet, knife shows were the place to sell knives. And if you were lucky enough, you can hand out a lot of business cards and then maybe get a phone call or a letter, and by doing so, receiving some orders. That was back then. Now with the internet and online sales and all that, well, you don't really have to go anywhere. So knife shows, most important factor is getting to meet your customers, and your customers get to handle your knives, get to talk with the maker, figure out, do I even like this maker? I think there's a lot of personality that comes into play when you pick a custom knife out, and the personality of the maker, I think that plays a huge factor. For me as a maker, getting to meet my customers and getting to see them handle my knives, getting some feedback as well, is something that I value very, very much. Over the years, I've been going regularly to 3 to 5 shows a year. I would like to go to 3 shows in the US and then add maybe 1 or 2 European shows as well. COVID-19 really threw a wrench into that whole setup, and it stopped all travel for me, and I had to kind of reinvent that whole show thing. And that's when I started my online knife show that I call Launch 15. What I learned by doing so was one of the things that I really enjoyed the most about preparing for a show and doing a show is that I have completely artistic freedom of what do I make and how do I make it and how many do I make. On a normal day-to-day basis, most of my hours in the shop is based on working on custom orders. And while I decide which models that I take orders for, I still work under the influence of the customer's wants and needs. So I have to make this model with this color, hardware, and this material. Whereas with the show knives, I have complete artistic freedom, which is also difficult at times, because when you can make whatever you want, choosing what you actually get to work on, that can be challenging for sure. Generally, when I work on show knives, I make knives that I want to buy or I want to carry. I think that's a very good rule of thumb. That's when I get most enthusiastic about my work, It's when I make something that fall into my taste. That it has become like a general rule for me. If I wouldn't carry it, why should someone else? I've toned the knife shows that I do physically down to 1 show per year, and I've decided that that show should be the NYCKS, the New York Custom Knife Show. That has historically speaking been the knife show that I enjoy the most. It's a small show. Usually there's about 100 exhibitors there. It's usually a 2-day show, which I really enjoy. 3-day shows are so hard on the exhibitors. I love Blade Show in Atlanta mainly because I get to walk around this massive show. But as an exhibitor, I prefer the smaller shows, and the New York Custom Show is just my preferred show. Being in New York obviously has a huge saying in that as well, just because I simply love being in New York, specifically Manhattan, but I love being in New York. So having a show in a city that I really love exploring, that's a huge bonus. So the New York Custom Knife Show is the one knife show that I do in 2024 with my own knives. I will be present at other shows. This year I will be at Blade Show West in Salt Lake City with Giant Mouse, but for now the New York Custom Knife Show is the only show that I do where I exhibit my own knives. In this case I laid out a tray of Casino parts. Casino is one of my small gentleman folders. It's a slip joint and one that I really enjoy making for shows. This specific one is also New York friendly in that it's a small non-locking folder. It's a non-threatening design, so it fits the bigger city really well. Incidentally, it has become a really popular model with watch guys as well, and one that I carry myself a lot. So New York being the birthplace of the Red Bar crew, I've sold a lot of casinos in New York. So of course I want to bring knives that I hope will sell. And it's in the lower end of my price range of custom knives as well. That helps too. All those thoughts go into play when I lay out knives to bring to a knife show. But here we have a bunch of different materials. We have titanium handle, we have G10 handle, we have zirconium, copper, bronze, and titanium again, as well as the blades are Damasteel and RWL 34. So I like to bring a mixed variety of what I make to any show that I attend, just to allow people to have something to pick from. But what it allows me is that once I've made a tray like this, it's ready for whatever work is needed afterwards. Now all the CNC work is done. Now all that is remaining is handwork, grinding work, assembly, fitting parts to each other, all that, everything that takes place here in the heart of my workshop. And to circle back on that note, while I laid out 6 casinos for this show, I might as well lay out 6 knives for the next launch 15 or the next one again. So rather than just laying out 6 knives, I laid out 12 casinos, and I will work on some of them at the same time and some of them dedicated just to that specific show. But for instance, I know that the clips for the casino require some special work, and I like to batch that up, and just making 6 clips just doesn't make sense. So one of the things that you'll see here when we start working on the parts is bending the clip, which requires a little extra finesse. But that is the overall thoughts behind preparing for a show for me, and I think we should get to the grinder and start preparing some parts. If you want to support this channel, you can visit my website right now and order your Aros. so common for all the parts that I pull out of my parts bins is that either they are straight out of the CNC machines or they have already seen some work before they was put into the bins. Here we have handles for the casino in bronze, copper, and zirconium. And while they might on camera look close to finish, there's a ton of grinding and hand finishing work that needs done before they end up on the finished knife. On these, I've already ground the circumference of the scales here to remove all marks from the milling machine. So here you would have had very visible milling machine marks, and I've ground these to a 320 grit finish already. So the next that needs doing now is to grind the surface. These are milled round, but they have a lot of texture from the mill that I want to remove with the belt grinder here. I'm gonna grind all these on a slack belt here and make the surface very smooth and even before I then actually texture the surface by hand. One of the things that, again, I really enjoy about making knives for a show is that I can experiment with textures, with patina, with the overall look of the finished knife. I can do a lot of experimenting with that, and I can leave choices of color of hardware up until the very last moment. When I see the color of the patina, I can choose a anodizing color for the titanium parts. I can wait and choose right before I've actually finished the knife rather than try to plan ahead, which also allows me to be much more creative, and I can make some choices that I wouldn't be able to do on a custom knife, because in the end the customer has decided which color variations they want. But here I have the final choice, and I can leave that to the very last minute. I actually enjoy that a lot. So now I'm gonna grind on the slack belt here and smooth out the surface. I'm gonna do some reaming on the drill press and then do some hand finishing. Finished grinding the surface of these 3 sets of scales, and now it's time to chamfer all the sharp edges here, make everything nice and smooth and comfortable to the touch. And I do that on my hardcore maximizer on a somewhat worn 320 grit belt. I want to have some bite to the belt, but again, if I use a completely fresh belt for this, it will take off too much with too little pressure. So I like to graduate my belts from anything from fresh to almost worn out, and each belt has its own need and use in the shop. Generally, I consider belts as free, meaning that whatever task that needs a sharp belt, I will use a sharp belt and not try to get the very last bit of life out of it, just because sharp belts gives a better product, especially when you grind the bevels. But on other jobs, you actually don't want the super sharp belts. And for instance, a job like the one that I'm going to show now, where we do all the chamfering, that's when you want something that is a little worn, not completely worn down, but a little worn, just to soften the touch a little bit if you want. So I needed to chamfer the pivot hole here on the casino scales, and apparently I haven't made casinos for a while because I couldn't find the specific chamfer that I custom made to this job. So I'm gonna customize this a little worn down chamfer here. Customize the chamfer here. I'm gonna chamfer all the pivot holes, do a little chamfering on the inside of the holes. Everything should be nice, even the areas of a knife that you don't actually get to see. But for me as a craftsman, I want the whole product to be nice, mainly for my own sake. So if I know that it's nice looking on the inside as well as the outside, it gives me a tremendous amount of satisfaction. So I go a few extra steps on a lot of parts of the knives just because, well, I need to, just for my own sake. One thing that I really enjoy about the casino is this area here. This is the area where the clip will engage into the backspacer where it's attached. And as of such, the casino is the only custom knife that I built where you can actually flip the clip from left side to right side, vice versa. This area right here is the only place that I can't use a machine to chamfer. So I'm using this triangular scraper here to actually carve a chamfer into this area here. And I really, really enjoy this process. It's a little difficult. It's quite fast, but it's a little difficult. But I really, really love this tiny little detail of working with one piece of dedicated hand tool for this specific job here.
What's the most difficult part of using that tool for chamfering?
It requires a steady hand for sure, and it requires some practice. It's not an overly difficult procedure, but you do need some kind of understanding of what you're going to achieve with it. Literally, it's carving metal with a knife. That's what you're doing. And one of the cool things about it is, and I use this procedure in different parts of the knife. For instance, I chamfer the lock cut out on some of my frame locks. I will chamfer small parts in backspacers and such. And the cool thing is that you can actually carve titanium with this, which is it's very similar to just carving in a piece of wood with your pocket knife, but this is carving metal with the scraper, and I just find that pretty cool. It's kind of an old world type of craft. So when I like mixing super high level machining with the CNC with a ancient, maybe not ancient, but at least several hundred years old technique of metal working. I think that is quite fascinating. I got the first triangular scraper from a friend who's a goldsmith, and when he gave me that, apparently that's a pretty common tool in the goldsmith area. But once I got this and started using it and I saw potential, I had to buy some more, and some of them are harder than others and some are smaller than others. Some will do other details, but common for all three of them is it's a simple steel triangular that is ground to a very fine edge here, and that's what does all the carving. Now that I ground the surface of the scale, I did the chamfers on the sides here, I did the chamfer here in the cutout, I did the inside chamfers. Now I'm gonna do a scratch pattern texture that I've come to really enjoy. It's a technique that also originates from jewelry craft and goldsmith craft, and it's a way to make an interesting surface that will adapt really well to patina. So it will give an interesting look, and it will also give a somewhat textured surface that will give a great grip. It will still be soft and nice to the touch, but it will be somewhat textured, but also it will leave scratches in the surface that will take on the patina really well. And specifically working with copper and bronze and other of the similar metals here, working with patina is just something that I find really interesting. So working with the surface finish is one really nice way of adding variations to the different kinds of patina that you can use. So I'm using a file here, and I'm going to scratch the surface with the file. One of the really interesting things, but also challenging things about a surface treatment like this is that it's completely random scratches that I apply to the metal, but I have to make it look planned and look uniform. And making random look uniform is actually really difficult. Very similar in mindset to what has become known as the Anso texture here on my Zero folder. This is a complete random pattern. This is done on the CNC now, after having done this by hand, grinding each scallop into the titanium and setting my hands on fire numerous times. Interesting part of the job, by the way. But making a uniform look out of random positioned and orientated grooves is actually really hard, and that is one of the things that makes working with surface finishes like this super challenging. So now I have completed the scratch pattern on this single set of scale here, and now it's ready for the patina process. And by just doing this whole scratch pattern, I actually also prepared the surface for the patina. Now it's clean, it's free of prior oxidization, and that gives just a better result. But I really look forward to adding patina to this scale here. That is one of my favorite part of making these type of knives, is adding that final layer, that final touch of color and depth to it, if you will. This is one of the procedures where I like to batch things up a bit. I'm going to bend the clip for the casino, and it requires this setup here. It's a relatively simple setup. It's an arbor press and a makeshift fixture that turned into a permanent fixture, temporary solutions 5 years later. Exact same fixture, but it works, so I fix it. The objective here is to bend this part around 90 degrees, and you can't do that with titanium unless you heat it up. You can bend titanium up towards 25, maybe 30 degrees if you're lucky, without heat, but anything above that, you will stress harden the material, and then it will simply break. So it's not that often I get to play with fire in the shop, but today we do. I've prepared a good handful of clips here. They are all ground, they've chamfered, they have been tumbled, all that. And the last step really before the final finish with bead blasting and coloring and all that is to bend it. So let's get started. this setup is used for a few other chores, so there's a little bit of adjustment from time to time that needs to be done on this. But so the first clip is like pancakes and your first child, they always turn out funny.
What are you looking for?
I just did a little bit of adjusting on where I put the bend in here, and I just wanted to make sure that it's actually in the right position here. I'm just gonna hold it up against the scale here and see if it looks right. So we did the final adjustment on the fixture here, and now we are ready to go. And for such procedures like this, just doesn't make sense to make the whole setup just for one clip. So both for easiness and consistency, it just makes a lot of sense to make a bunch of clips at the same time. I hope you enjoyed this episode about preparing for the New York Customs Show. If you did, come see me at the New York Customs Show. It's very soon. And remember, the order book for the hours is open right now. Click the link below to go to my site to order your hours right now. Until next time, see you later.